The Canadian government is forging ahead with its plan to greenlight and break ground on so-called nation-building projects. Step one was legislation. The government secured passage of Bill C-5 in the House of Commons Friday. Next up, the Senate, where it's expected to pass. But legislation is only the first step. The government is also going to have to build consensus. Prime Minister Mark Carney has already insisted he will not impose a project on a province, for example, that doesn't want it. And that puts Alberta potentially on a collision course with British Columbia, where the Premier has already said he doesn't support a new oil pipeline through his jurisdiction. David Eby is the Premier of BC. He's with us now. Premier, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to our program.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Bashi.
Before I get into all of that and a couple of other things, I know that you're fresh out of a meeting with other premiers and the Prime Minister. And just before that meeting, a day before, the federal government had made announcements where counter tariffs are concerned and countermeasures are concerned, basically where the U.S. applies. They're waiting until the potential for a deal a month from now. But there are going to be measures against other tariffs, other countries, where we don't have a free trade agreement. What's your reaction to that?
Well, certainly we're glad to see the Prime Minister taking a strong stand against U.S. tariffs on our steel and aluminum industries. A lot of people work in these industries across the country, and we want to see that strong support. And we're very hopeful that we'll see a deal in the 30 days. I guess the anxiety that I have coming from Western Canada is we need to deepen trade relationships with everybody else in the world, and we don't want to open new trade wars with other countries. And so while we certainly have concern about dumping and about our local industries, I think there are ways that we can deal with that without duties on third countries that we're trying to deepen relationships with, including by supporting the cost of transportation of Ontario steel to British Columbia, for example. It's cost prohibitive. We'd love to use Ontario steel out here, but it costs too much to ship it. So let's take that kind of approach rather than antagonizing people who we want to be partners in responding to U.S. aggression to our country.
Do you ultimately think that this move will antagonize them? And did you communicate that to the Prime Minister?
I'm deeply concerned that, in addition to our non-free trade agreement partners, that anti-dumping duties could also apply to the very countries that I just visited last week, to Japan, to South Korea, to Malaysia. These are countries that we're trying to diversify our trade relationships with, where I was just saying, like, we want to work with you guys. We need to deepen our relationship with you. We just don't want to be sending those signals that we're going to hurt them in order to please the United States. It won't move us forward.
A few weeks ago on this program, the Premier of Alberta, when I posed to her against the backdrop of the pitch she was already making for a pipeline that went through her province carrying oil to the northwest part of yours, that you had at the time signaled like your view on that had not changed. She said she intends to convince you otherwise. Can she convince you?
Well, I think, sometimes I feel like the media is gathering around and chanting fight, fight, fight between us and Alberta right now. There's no fight here. The concern that I have is a matter of priorities. We have a taxpayer-funded pipeline, the TMX pipeline. It's owned by Canadians. It's not operating at capacity. There's 200,000 additional barrels of capacity in that pipeline. Let's start there. I don't support tens of billions of dollars in federal subsidy for a brand new pipeline across the north, getting rid of the tanker ban off the north coast, when we have major projects in BC and in Alberta with private companies that are advancing them, that are ready to work, ready to dig, ready to employ people, ready to diversify our trade relationships. Why would we prioritize a massive public spend like that when more limited public spend could deliver additional capacity through the pipeline we already own? And so many projects that are ready to go with actual proponents and able to deliver in a short period of time.
I certainly understand the pushback against the framing, and I'll explain to you why I position it to yourself and to Premier Smith that way. I lived in Alberta. I covered Northern Gateway. I covered then Premier Christy Clark's opposition. I remember later covering Premier Horgan and the degree to which he said, I'll use every tool in my toolbox, and the way he was at odds with someone from his own party who led the province of Alberta at the time, Premier Notley. So my question is informed by historical context, and it's why I pose it to you. I understand what you're saying about public spend. The Premier of Alberta seems to contend that if you were to say, well, I'm open to that, and she were to say, I'd like to do whatever I can to convince British Columbians that this would work for them too, that a private proponent would come forward and there would be the environment in which that could actually be possible. So I'm asking you very bluntly if that is something you could acquiesce on.
Well, I've said very clearly to Premier Smith that if she's able to arrange that, then we're happy to sit down with Alberta and have that conversation with them about what that would look like. But let's be honest with ourselves. We have a $36 billion pipeline that's publicly owned that the federal government cannot sell. It's not even operating at capacity. There is not a world in which that pipeline across the north happens without significant federal subsidy. If the Premier of Alberta is able to pull that off, I say more power to her. Let's sit down and have that conversation. But in the meantime, we've got a huge amount of work to do with Alberta. When I was in Japan, Malaysia, Korea, the conversations about ammonia, about hydrogen, LNG, all of them anxious about energy security. Huge work that we can do with massive private project proponents, huge investment in both of our provinces. I think this is where our attention should be. And I'm going to do my best not to have our provinces divided when we need to be coming together.
Why do you assume that federal subsidies would be needed? They were
needed for the last one.
Yeah, they were needed for the last one, but they haven't been needed for everyone. And to be fair, that pipeline is adding 0.5% to our country's collective GDP. Like, that is not nothing.
No, and we have major projects in British Columbia and projects that overlap with Alberta that will have similar impact on Canada's GDP. But the reality is that there's a reason why there's no proponent. There's a reason why there's not a big private company that's advocating for this, is because the economics aren't there. And so it will require federal subsidy. If the Premier of Alberta is able to deliver it, then let's have that conversation. But I don't see that. I don't even see someone who's stepping forward with federal subsidy currently. So let's talk about the projects that are actually here, that are going to be delivered in the here and now, that will have that impact of increasing GDP. And a lot of that involves work that BC is going to have to do with Alberta and with the Yukon and with the federal government.
Why is it mutually exclusive? Like, can't both happen at the same time? Like, can't the environment be created through, for example, Bill C-5, as the federal government is promising it will be, just passed late last week, in order to allow for the possibility of a private proponent? And can't also all the very valuable projects that you're talking about go ahead and increase the prosperity of our whole country? Like, why can't all of that happen at once?
It can, Vashi, and that's why BC signed on with Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan at the Western Premiers Conference for a corridor running from Manitoba to Prince Rupert for energy products, for electricity, for additional rail capacity. If Premier Smith is able to come up with this project, that's what the corridor will be for. Count me as skeptical and count me as opposed to the idea of tens of billions of dollars of additional federal subsidy when we have a pipeline that is not currently at capacity in our province operating right now.
Despite the fact that it adds as much as it does to GDP? Like, that does nothing for you?
It doesn't, Vashi. It doesn't exist. So
no, I'm not saying that. Sorry, my apologies. I meant TMX. I don't mean some imaginary pipeline that hasn't been built yet, but the one that did require federal subsidies. Many would argue, because the environment of it was created by the federal government at the time, like, is making money for Canadians.
Yes, fantastic, but it's also not operating at capacity. There's 200,000 additional barrels of capacity in that pipeline. So if the issue is getting Alberta products to Tidewater, why wouldn't we start there?
I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate your time today, as always, Premier. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Vashi.
When we come back, new world disorder. U.S. President Donald Trump is attacking allies and praising adversaries. My next guest, former federal Liberal Party leader Michael Ignatieff, says it's time to acknowledge Pax Americana is dead. That conversation is next, right here on Question Period.